The grease never fully washed out. Aaliyah Broussard had scrubbed her hands twice in the break room sink, used the lemon soap her coworker Tanya kept on the shelf above the paper towels, and still underneath her fingernails, there was a thin dark crescent she couldn't reach. 8 hours on the floor of Savoy's, a Creole fusion restaurant on the edge of Midtown's garment district, and the kitchen smelled like it had followed her out onto the street. Rendered duck fat, blackened catfish, the scorched sugarcane rim of a cocktail she'd spilled and remade and carried to table 7 with a smile that hadn't reached her eyes since around the 3rd hour of her shift. Atlanta had a way of cooking everything in summer. Even October evenings held humidity like a wet cloth pressed to your face, and the air outside Savoy's staff exit smelled like exhaust and the ghost of a rainstorm that had come and gone before she clocked out. Her feet were the worst part. They always were. She wore compression socks under her black trousers, a trick her grandmother had taught her, but after a double shift, even those surrendered. The ache started at her heels and moved upward through her calves like something slow and deliberate, the way floodwater rises without announcing itself. She stood under the narrow awning at the back of the building, her phone out, thumb navigating to the rideshare app. Her purse was wedged between her elbow and her ribs. Her uniform, white button-down, black trousers, the small gold name tag that said Aaliyah in a cursive the manager had chosen without asking her, was damp at the collar and the small of her back. The app loaded. A black sedan, license plate JKS 409, driver name Michael, ETA 2 minutes. She looked up. The service lane behind the restaurant was narrow and poorly lit, the kind of street that appeared on no tourism maps. There was a dumpster at the far end, a streetlight that flickered with a slow, arrhythmic pulse, and idling at the curb, already there, already waiting, a black car, sleek, low to the ground, the kind of black that didn't look painted so much as decided upon, the black of something that had never been any other color. She checked her phone again. Black sedan, JKS 409. She couldn't see the plate from where she stood. The car was close, engine running, wipers clearing the last of the rain from the windshield in lazy arcs. She was tired in the specific way that dismantles careful thinking. The kind of tired that turns probably fine into definitely fine without any evidence in between. She walked to the car. The back door opened before she touched the handle, swinging outward as if someone inside had triggered it remotely, and she folded herself in without looking. Head ducked, purse first, the practiced movement of someone who had been doing this exact thing after late shifts for 2 years running. The door closed behind her, and then she became aware of 3 things in rapid, terrible sequence. The first, the interior smelled nothing like a rideshare, no air freshener shaped like a pine tree, no faint residue of the previous passenger's takeout. It smelled like sandalwood and something older, something that took up space the way expensive things did. Leather and a cologne she couldn't name, but would have recognized again anywhere. The second, the seat beneath her was not the slightly sticky upholstery of a Toyota Camry. It was cold, smooth leather, the kind that warmed slowly to your body temperature, that gave under your weight with a precision that felt engineered. The third, there was a man beside her, not in the driver's seat, beside her, in the back. She had sat down next to a man who had been sitting in perfect stillness and perfect silence, and she had not noticed him until her shoulder was 6 inches from his. Aaliyah's body made the decision before her mind did. She went completely still, the kind of still that prey animals understand and humans have to relearn. Every muscle suspending itself, a held breath, a stopped clock. The man did not move either. In the dim interior light, she could see his profile. Sharp, angular in a way that suggested architecture rather than genetics, as if each feature had been placed with intention. He was Korean, somewhere in his mid to late 30s, with dark hair worn close at the sides and slightly longer on top, a jaw that could have cut glass, and hands. She noticed his hands because they were resting on his thighs, perfectly relaxed, which was somehow more frightening than if they had been moving. He wore a suit the color of charcoal, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. A watch on his left wrist caught the passing light of a street lamp, The kind of watch that did not need to announce itself. And he turned his head slowly and looked at her. His eyes were dark, not unkind, but not kind either. The eyes of someone who had long ago stopped organizing the world into those two categories. The partition between the back seat and the front was up. She could see the silhouette of a driver beyond the smoked glass. The car had not moved. This, her voice came out at the wrong register. Too high, and she dropped it deliberately. The way she'd learned to do at work when customers tried to rattle her. This isn't my Uber. No, the man said, one word. His English was precise and unaccented in the way of someone who had learned it with intention rather than absorbed it through osmosis. It carried a register she felt more in her sternum than her ears. Her hand found the door handle. She pulled it. The lock didn't engage, or rather, it engaged. And then something released it, a quiet mechanical click. Hammer in the door swung open 2 inches. Cold air licked her shoulder. The man beside her still had not moved. He had not raised a hand, had not shifted his weight, had not looked away from whatever point in the middle distance he had returned to after those 2 syllables. Aaliyah looked at the gap in the door, looked at the narrow service lane outside, looked back at the man. I'm going to get out of this car now, she said. Not a question. A statement she was making out loud to test whether it was true. You should check your app first, the man said. She stared at him. He still hadn't looked at her. Your rideshare, he said. Check it. Her thumb moved without her deciding to let it. The app was still open. And there in the small map window, she watched a car icon stop 2 buildings down from where she stood, where she had stood, and sit there, waiting. The real car. JKS 409. When the message at the top of the screen. Your driver is waiting. Please proceed to the pickup location. The cold from the open door spread across her collarbone. She had gotten into the wrong car. Not his wrong car. Her wrong car. She had walked past her actual driver, opened this door, this stranger's door, and sat down beside a man she had never met inside a vehicle that was not a rideshare by any definition that had ever existed. Before we continue, if you believe in the kind of love that pays attention, the kind of people who refuse to be invisible, and if you want a quiet, steady love of your own, you're in the right place. Pull up a chair and hit subscribe to join a family that values real depth and second chances. Also, drop a comment and let us know where you're from. What city or neighborhood shaped you, my people? Now let's get back to Aaliyah. She pulled the door shut. She did not fully understand why. And the self-preservation calculus was not clean. Being inside this car was not demonstrably safer than being outside it. And yet something in the architecture of the moment told her that bolting into the dark of an unfamiliar service lane, alone at 11:40 at night, was its own category of risk. Also, and she would not have admitted this out loud for anything, the man had told her to check her app. He had given her information. He had not prevented her from opening the door. The people who intended harm did not typically do either of those things, or so she told herself. I'm sorry, she said. I made a mistake. I thought the car looked. I'm sorry. She heard herself repeat the apology a 3rd time and stopped. I'll get out. Is there somewhere safer? The lane is. Kwana. The man spoke Korean without raising his voice, and the partition slid down 3 inches. The driver, young, square-shouldered, expression carefully neutral, appeared in the gap. Hur apin and golmogoro dolaso. Pull around to the front alley. Nah. The partition rose again. The car moved. Aaliyah pressed herself against her door. Where are you going? The front of the building. It's better lit. He said it like it was obvious, like he had already done the math on her situation and arrived at the most efficient solution. Your driver's waiting 2 blocks north. You'll be able to see him from there. She stared at the side of his face. He had returned to his original stillness. With hands on thighs, gaze ahead, as if she were already gone, and the episode had already been filed away and closed. Why? She said. He blinked. A slow, deliberate blink, the kind that preceded speech. Why what? Why does it matter to you whether the alley is lit? A pause. Not the pause of someone searching for an answer. The pause of someone deciding how much of a true answer to give. It doesn't, he said, and something in his tone suggested this was not entirely a lie and not entirely the truth. But you're in my car. Whatever happens to you while you're in my car reflects on me. The car rounded the corner and the street opened up. Street lights, the glass front of a dry cleaner, a convenience store with neon in its windows. 2 blocks down, a sedan idled at the curb with its hazards blinking. Her real car. That's him, she said. I see it. The car stopped, and the door unlocked with that same quiet mechanical precision. Aaliyah gathered her purse. Her hands were steadier than she'd expected. She was proud of that, in a distant way. The way you could be proud of a part of yourself that was behaving better than the rest of you. She pushed the door open and stepped out onto the sidewalk, and the air was cooler here, less compressed, and she pulled it in deliberately. She looked back into the car. The man was already looking at her. She hadn't caught him in the act. He'd made no effort to conceal it. He simply looked at her, with those flat dark eyes that had stopped organizing the world into kind and unkind, and said nothing. Thank you, she said. Yeah. He nodded once, barely a nod. The door swung closed between them, and the black car pulled away from the curb in complete silence. No gravel kick, no engine surge. Just the smooth, expensive disappearance of something that had probably never fully arrived. Aaliyah stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she walked to her real car, got in, and spent the entire 40-minute ride home staring out the window at nothing. 3 days later, she would think about it. Not constantly. She was not the kind of person who let strange things live rent-free for long. She had rent to think about, an electricity bill that had gone up since she started keeping the fan running at night, and a second job interview for a restaurant over in Buckhead that she needed to prepare for. Strange men and expensive cars ranked somewhere below all of those things in the ledger of urgent concerns. But occasionally, between tables, she would be carrying a plate of etouffee or wiping down a two-top by the window, and her mind would snag on it. The cologne, the stillness. The way he had said it doesn't with that particular economy of language. Like punctuation was something he rationed. She didn't tell anyone. Tanya would have called the police probably, or at least insisted she should have. Her mother would have made it into a prayer circle situation. Neither of those felt right for something that had not, technically, been dangerous, had merely occupied the same shape as danger without becoming it. She kept it to herself, added it to the shelf in her memory where she kept things she wasn't ready to examine yet. On the 4th day, she left Savoy's at 10:15 instead of 11 because the dinner rush had thinned early and the manager had offered her the out. She was standing on the sidewalk at the front of the building this time. She had decided, without fully articulating the decision, that she would never use the service entrance alone again at night, when the black car appeared. Not passing, not pulling over to let someone out. It came around the corner with a slow, considered arc and stopped in front of her with the measured intention of something that had been planning this for a while. The window rolled down, not the driver's window, the back one. "You're early tonight," said the man who was not a rideshare driver and never had been. Aaliyah looked at her phone, looked at the car, looked at the man. "You've been watching the restaurant," she said. "I've been in the area." Not a denial, not quite a confirmation. "Oh, that's not the same thing as no." The corner of his mouth moved. 1 millimeter, maybe 2. "You're right, it's not." He paused. "I wanted to apologize for the other night. You were frightened." "I wasn't frightened," she said, which was a lie and they both knew it. But she held his gaze while she said it, and he had the grace not to challenge it. "Regardless," and he said, "it was an unsettling situation, and you handled it." He seemed to turn the word over briefly before selecting it. "Well, I got into your car by accident and sat next to you for 2 minutes without screaming. That's a low bar for well." "You'd be surprised," he said, "how many people don't clear it." She studied him. In the streetlight, he looked different than he had in the back seat. Sharper at the edges, more visible. The tailored charcoal suit had been replaced by a dark coat over a dark knit, and he wore it with the same absolute lack of effort that some people wore everything. Whereas if clothing had long ago given up trying to make a statement on his behalf and settled for simply covering him. "Who are you?" she asked. A pause. The measured kind. My name is Seo Junwan, he said. And then, because she was clearly waiting for more, I run several businesses in Atlanta, a property development firm officially. Other things, less officially. Other things, she repeated. Yes. She looked at the car, at the driver who was a statue in the front seat, at the empty back seat where the man, Seo Junwan, was watching her with the patient attention of someone who had decided to wait and meant it. Why are you telling me that? Because you'll find out anyway, he said. People like you always do, and I'd rather you hear it from me. People like you. She wanted to ask what that meant, and something told her the answer would rearrange the evening in ways she wasn't ready for. I have a ride coming, she said. I know. If you have 4 minutes. He said it without looking at his phone. I was hoping to speak with you briefly. A proposal. I don't know you. No, but you're considering it anyway. Not arrogance. Observation. He said it the way a doctor might describe a symptom, accurately and without judgment. She was. She did not get in the car. She stood on the sidewalk with her purse against her side and her compression socks under her black trousers and her hands loose at her sides, and she listened. And the window was between them, and she told herself that was important, that it constituted technically a barrier. There's a dinner, Junwon said, 3 weeks from now, a private gathering at a venue I've rented in Brookhaven. 40 guests. It's not a restaurant event. It's personal, and the people attending require discretion. He paused. I need front-of-house staff who are exceptional at their jobs and better at keeping their mouths shut. I was going to use an agency, but agencies have paper trails. Aaliyah stared at him. You want to hire me, she said, for 1 evening, to wait tables, to manage service. The distinction matters. A beat. I watched you work for 4 hours through the window of the building across the street before deciding to come back. You don't spill. You don't stall. When a table turns difficult, you find a way to make it their idea to behave. You are, again that brief pause, that word weighing, precisely the kind of person this event requires. 4 hours. He had watched her work for 4 hours. She should have been horrified. She cataloged the horror, acknowledged its legitimacy, and then set it aside to look at the thing underneath it, which was, he had come back, had sat in a car across the street from her job for 4 hours watching her carry plates and refill water glasses and navigate the particular theater of front-of-house service. Yeah, and he had concluded she was worth returning for. No one had ever watched her work and decided it was a credential. What's the pay? She said. Something shifted in his expression. Infinitesimal. If she had blinked, she would have missed it. He named a number. It was 1 month's rent for 1 evening. Her rideshare notification buzzed in her pocket. 1 minute out. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. She took 2 steps back from the car and then stopped. How did you know what I looked like? If this was really the first time you were looking for me. The window began to roll up. Through the narrowing gap, she watched his face. You left your name tag on, he said. And then the window was closed and the car was pulling away. And Aaliyah stood on the sidewalk with the night air pressing against her collar. And the name tag, Mom, Aaliyah, cursive, gold, still clipped to her shirt because she had forgotten again to take it off. She called the number on the card 7 days later at 7 in the morning, before she was fully awake and therefore before the more cautious parts of her brain could override the rest. She said yes. He said good. He gave her an address and a time and a dress code. All black, formal, your own choice of silhouette, and nothing else. The venue in Brookhaven was a converted estate on a tree-lined private road, the kind of address that didn't appear in any commercial database. Iron gates, one a long gravel drive bordered by maples that had gone red and copper in the October cold. The main house was old money pretending to be older, brick and white columns and tall windows that threw warm rectangles of light onto the lawn in the dark. She arrived at 5, 3 hours before the guests. A woman named Ji-Soo, Junwan's event coordinator, met her at the service entrance. Not the main entrance, she noted, between which she would have noted regardless, and noted more carefully now, and walked her through the floor plan with the brisk efficiency of someone who did not have time to repeat herself. 40 guests. Seated dinner, 6 courses. 2 additional servers who Jisoo had sourced and vetted. Aaliyah's role, floor management, coordination between the kitchen and the dining room, and Jisoo said this last part with a particular flatness, guest relations as needed. What does as needed mean? Aaliyah asked. Jisoo looked at her with an expression that suggested the question was reasonable and also unanswerable in advance. It means the guests are not all alike. Some are easy, some require handling. Handling. Mr. CEO's associates come from a variety of backgrounds. Some of those backgrounds have customs about service staff. Jisoo paused. If anything makes you uncomfortable, you come to me. Not to any of the guests. Or to me. It was a warning dressed as logistics. Aaliyah filed it. The evening started cleanly. Guests arrived in pairs and small clusters, men mostly in suits that occupied the same economic tier as Junwon's, moving through the entrance hall with the particular ease of people who had long ago stopped noticing rooms like this. There were 3 women, all of whom carried themselves with the contained authority of people who did not need the room to notice them. Junwon was the last to enter the dining room. He wore black, a slim, single-button suit with a lapel that sat flat and perfect, a white shirt with no tie, cufflinks that caught the candlelight once and did not make an effort to do it again. He moved through the room the way a current moves through water. You didn't see the force, you saw what it did to everything around it. Conversations pivoted, postures adjusted. The room reorganized itself subtly and entirely without acknowledgement, till he caught her eye across the dining room. She was standing near the service door with her notepad, going through the course timing with the head of the kitchen relay. She looked up. Not because she had been watching the door, she told herself, though the evidence did not clearly support this, and he was already looking at her. He gave her a nod that was both professional and too precise to be only professional, and she turned back to the kitchen relay and said, "All right, the halibut course should hold by 5 minutes if the first 2 run long. Don't push it." The dinner was, she found no simpler word for it, flawless. Not because nothing went wrong. The wine sommelier arrived 12 minutes late, and she covered the first pour herself without flagging it to Jisoo. A guest at the far end of the table had an allergy that had not been logged, and she rerouted his 3rd course in under 90 seconds. The substitution arriving before he had finished noticing the original wasn't coming. A disagreement between 2 men near the window, conducted in low Korean, with the particular stillness of something that could become very loud very fast, dissolved after she appeared at the table to clear a course at a moment that broke the rhythm of whatever was escalating. She didn't do that last one intentionally. She happened to be there. But she saw Junwon register it from across the room. A glance. A fractional pause in whatever conversation he was holding. And she filed that too. After the final course, after the guests had moved to the drawing room for whatever came after dinner at gatherings like this, after the other 2 servers had been thanked and released, and Jisoo had begun the quiet machinery of breakdown and accounting, Aaliyah stood in the emptied dining room, stacking linen napkins into a basket. "You broke up the thing at the window," said Junwon's voice. And she looked up to find him in the doorway, jacket still on, hands in his pockets. "I was clearing the table." "You were there 40 seconds before the table needed clearing." He came into the room, not quickly, the way he moved everything, with the patience of someone who understood that arrival was its own statement. The man on the left was about to say something he couldn't take back. "You appeared and he didn't." She set down the napkin basket. "How is that a problem?" "It's a curiosity." He stopped on the other side of the table she was clearing. 12 feet of mahogany between them. Candles burned low in their holders. "Most people in service learn to become invisible. They work very hard at it. You did the opposite. You became visible at exactly the right moment." 8 years of this," she said. "You learn where to stand." 8 years. He seemed to weigh the number. "You started young. 16. My grandmother's diner, off Auburn Avenue, before it closed." She hadn't meant to say that last part. It had come out of the same place the tiredness always came from. The lower register, where the things you didn't plan to say lived. She picked up the napkin basket. "What was it called?" he said. She looked at him. He was not asking to fill space. His eyes were on her face with the same quality of attention she had felt that first night. Not surveillance, exactly. Something more like being listened to with the whole body. Broussard's, she said, on Edgewood. What happened to it? What happens to everything on Edgewood? She shrugged, a single economic motion. Rent went up. Foot traffic went somewhere else. My grandmother held on 3 years longer than she should have, and then she let it go because she's smart even when it hurts. A pause. I'm sorry, June said. Not that's unfortunate, not that's the market. Just those two words, she placed without ornamentation, and they landed with more weight than an entire paragraph of condolence would have. She nodded once, picked up the basket, carried it toward the service door. Miss Broussard, she stopped, did not turn immediately, gave herself one breath, the way she did before approaching a table that was going to be difficult. There's a second event, he said, a smaller one, dinner for 12 in 5 weeks. Different kind of gathering, longer, more involved. The compensation would reflect that. She turned. You'd need to tell me what involved means, she said. He looked at her steadily. Some of the guests will discuss business, the kind of business where it matters who's in the room and who isn't. And you want me in the room. I want someone managing the room who I can trust to manage it. A pause. You've earned that? Surety tonight. Aaliyah looked at this man across 12 feet of candlelit mahogany and thought about the electricity bill and the Buckhead interview she'd canceled because the pay was worse than Savoy's and the commute was longer, and thought about 8 years of carrying plates for people who looked through her like glass, and thought about her grandmother holding on 3 years longer than she should have because letting go of the thing you built is its own category of loss. Our same rate, she said. Better, he said. I'll be in touch, she said. And she carried the napkin basket through the service door and did not look back, even though she was aware, in the way you're aware of heat from a distance, that he watched her go. The second dinner was in a penthouse on the 34th floor of a midtown tower that had no exterior signage and a lobby that looked, from the outside, like the entrance to a law firm. Majisu met her at the elevator bank on the 34th floor and walked her through the space without preamble. 12 guests. A long dining table in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. The city spread below in its full nighttime display, amber and white, in the occasional red pulse of towers. A kitchen the size of her entire apartment, already occupied by 2 chefs she didn't recognize, moving through their prep with the focused silence of people who understood that the kitchen conversation would happen after. This time, Jisu's briefing included 2 sentences that the first one hadn't. You will hear things tonight, she said, that you will not repeat, not to a friend, not in a journal, not to anyone. If you are the kind of person who needs to process experiences aloud, this is your last opportunity to decline. Aaliyah held Jisu's gaze. Donnie, I'm not. Jisu looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite satisfied and not quite skeptical. Mr. Seo will introduce you to the guests at the beginning of the evening. This is not standard. It means they will know who you are, which means they know you have been vouched for. A pause. That is both a protection and a weight. You understand? She understood. One of the guests arrived differently at this dinner, not in the clusters and pairs of the Brookhaven event, but in 1s and 2s at staggered intervals, each one shown in by a man at the elevator who Aaliyah had not seen at the first dinner and who had the particular stillness she had learned in the past weeks to associate with Junwan's orbit. Men who stood without fidgeting, men who held their hands in a way that suggested they were aware, at all times, of where those hands were. Junwan arrived last, and this time he brought with him a man she hadn't seen before. Older, heavy-shouldered, with white at his temples and the bearing of someone who had stopped needing to prove anything about 20 years ago. They spoke in Korean at the entrance, low and continuous, and Aaliyah was across the room arranging the final table setting, and she caught none of it but the cadence, measured on Junwan's side, something looser and more pressurized on the other man's. An argument, such she thought, or the negotiation that comes just before one. Junwan saw her across the room. He said something brief to the older man, touched his arm once, a gesture she hadn't seen him make before, physical contact as a kind of punctuation, and crossed the room toward her. The roses, he said, looking at the centerpiece. Jisoo chose them? She did. Should I? They're fine. She knows the aesthetic. He was still looking at the table, but not the roses, at the broader arrangement. At the geography of the place settings, the angles. Yoon Chang-sik will sit at the far end. If he asks for more of anything, water, wine, food, bring it before he finishes asking. He interprets waiting as disrespect. Understood. Kim Jae-hyuk, 2 seats to his left, won't eat the fish course. He won't say so. You'll need to swap it without making it visible. What's his preference? Jun Won glanced at her. Ask Jisoo. She has the file. A pause. And Miss Broussard? She looked at him. Well, he had never used her first name. She was aware of this without knowing when she had started tracking it. If anything feels wrong tonight, he said, come to me. Not to Jisoo, to me. It was nearly identical to what Jisoo had said to her before the first dinner. If anything makes you uncomfortable, come to me. Different name at the end, different weight. Feels wrong how, she said. You'll know, he said, and walked back to Chang-sik. The dinner was longer than the first. 4 hours. The conversation at the table moved between English and Korean, and twice a language he didn't recognize. Not Japanese, something further east, something with different rhythms. She managed the room. Swapped the fish course before Kim Jae-hyuk registered it was coming. Refilled Chang-sik's water twice before he gestured. Read the table's emotional temperature with the granular attention her grandmother had taught her. Watching hands, not faces. Watching how people held their silverware between bites. Watching the micro adjustments that happened when someone said something that landed wrong. Around the 3rd hour, it landed wrong. She was at the service station, reviewing the dessert timing, when the register of the table shifted. She didn't hear the words. The table was 20 feet away, and the conversation had been in Korean for the past 20 minutes. But she heard the shift. See, the particular silence that moves into a room the way weather does. Not suddenly, but with a pressure change you feel in your ears before you understand what it means. She looked up. Chang-sik was speaking. His voice had not risen, but his posture had changed. The forward lean that moved him from seated to present, that made him occupy more of the room. Jun Won, across the table, was completely still in the way she had cataloged from that first night. The stillness that was not passivity, but its exact opposite. She walked to the table. She carried nothing. No plate, no water carafe, because there was nothing to carry yet, and she had never done this before, had never walked toward a table empty-handed without a clear logistical purpose. And she felt the strangeness of it, the way you feel a wrong step in the dark. But she walked to Chang-sik's end of the table, and she said quietly, in the register she reserved for tables that needed the temperature taken down without knowing it was being taken down. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Yoon. We have the dessert course ready to hold or proceed, at your preference. Chang-sik looked at her. The room paused. She met his eyes and did not flinch from them. Kept her face in the professional register, pleasant and attentive, and giving him nothing to push against because there was nothing there to push against. She's just a woman in black asking a man about dessert. His expression shifted, a fractional relaxation around the mouth. He leaned back by an inch. Proceed, he said, in English, for her benefit. Thank you, she said, and turned back toward the kitchen. She did not look at Jun Won. Later, after the last guest had gone, and Jisoo's breakdown crew was moving through the penthouse with their quiet efficiency, Jun Won found her in the kitchen, making a cup of coffee from the machine the chefs had left on. Black, no milk, the only way she drank it at this hour. He stood in the doorway. She was aware of him before she turned around, the same way she'd been aware of the heat from a distance. You did that on purpose, he said. The dessert question? I needed to know the timing. You needed to know the timing at the exact moment Chang-sik was about to say something he would have regretted tomorrow. He paused. That's twice now. She turned around, coffee in hand. He was in the doorway in his full black evening suit, and the kitchen was bright and ordinary around him. And there was something almost dissonant about it, like finding a storm system inside a fluorescent-lit room. I read tables, she said. I've been doing it since I was 16. It's not a skill, it's just pattern recognition. Chang-sik is not a table. His voice was even. Wendy Chang-sik is the head of a distribution network that covers 6 states and operates with the tolerance of 3 different municipal governments. If he had said what he was going to say tonight, I would have spent the next 6 weeks managing the consequences. Aaliyah held her coffee. Is that a thank you? Junwan looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes that she didn't have a name for yet. A softening that didn't reach his face, only existed in the depth of his gaze. Yes, he said. Either that is a thank you. And then more quietly, Gamsahabnida, Aliyah, her first name. Finally. The kitchen hummed with the afterbeat of the evening. The city glittered through the window. She looked at this man who had come back for her, who had watched her work and decided she was worth watching, who had warned her that the weight of being known was not the same as the weight of being safe. And she did not look away. You're welcome, she said. The third event was not an event. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November. No guests, no Jisoo, no breakdown crew. Junwan called her directly, the first time he had used her number for anything other than logistics, and asked if she could come to the Midtown penthouse at 2 o'clock. He said it the way he said most things, without preamble, without softening, as if he had already done the work of deciding whether to ask and was now simply informing her of the conclusion. She almost said no. She was between a lunch shift and a dinner shift at Savoy's, with 4 hours to fill, and the sensible thing, the thing her grandmother would have recognized as sensible, was to go home, take off her shoes, eat something that wasn't a standing meal over a prep counter, and be horizontal for 90 minutes. That was the sensible thing. She said yes. He met her at the elevator himself. No Kwan, no building lobby attendant with the careful stillness she had catalogued. Just Junwan in dark trousers and a gray knit with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, which was the most undressed she had ever seen him, and which she noted with the same deliberate neutrality she applied to all observations about him now, filing it away without attaching anything to the file. I need your opinion on something, he said, which was a sentence she had not heard from him before, and she followed him into the penthouse. The dining room looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, so despite the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city in daylight was less theatrical than at night, more factual, all the grit made visible by the November sun. Someone had set 2 places at the end of the long table. Not the formal settings of the dinner events, just plates, real plates, the heavy ceramic kind, and 2 coffee cups and a spread of food from somewhere that had packaged it in paper containers. Rice, banchan in small dishes, something braised that smelled like ganjang and star anise, and an entire childhood she didn't have. She looked at the table, looked at him. Jisoo ordered, he said, with a tone that suggested he was aware this did not fully explain the situation. Jisoo ordered Korean comfort food for a Tuesday afternoon meeting, Aaliyah said. I told her I was having a working lunch. This is a lot of food for a working lunch. Jisoo has opinions about portion sizes. He pulled out the chair at the end without making a gesture of it. Not an offer, exactly. More like a rearrangement of the room's geography that happened to place the chair in her direction. She sat. He sat across from her. She reached for a container and served herself rice with the careful attention of someone who was deciding in real time and what this was and what it wasn't. He did the same. For a moment, the only sound was the soft percussion of serving spoons and the city far below, and the specific silence that settles between 2 people who have more to say than either of them is ready to begin with. The opinion, she said finally. He looked up. You said you needed my opinion on something. Yes. He set down his spoon, laced his hands on the table with a deliberateness she recognized as his version of preparation. When there's a development opportunity, a block on Edgewood Avenue, commercial ground floor, residential above, the previous owner held it for 20 years. It came available last month. Aaliyah's spoon stopped moving. Edgewood Avenue. There are 4 commercial units on the ground floor, Junwan continued. Currently vacant. I'm considering the acquisition, but I haven't decided what the development program should be. The neighborhood is... He paused, choosing. It's in transition. The wrong development would accelerate that transition in ways I'd prefer to avoid. She looked at him across the table. He looked back at her, steady and without apology. You want my opinion? She said. On a block on Edgewood Avenue. You know the street. You know what it was. I thought, my grandmother's diner was on Edgewood Avenue, she said. Not an accusation, a clarification. I know. The two words sat on the table between them, like something physical. You looked it up, she said. One, yes. After I mentioned it, yes. She put her spoon down, looked at the food she had served herself, the steam rising from the rice in the thin November light, and did the thing she had learned to do in the years since Broussard's had closed. The thing her grandmother had modeled for her in the months after, going about her days with the contained dignity of someone who understood that grief was real and also that you still had to eat, still had to move, you still had to keep the shape of your life from collapsing. What do you want to put there? She said. Her voice was even. That's what I'm asking you. That's not an answer. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a plane crossed the window frame of sky above the city and disappeared. I have the capital to develop it in any direction. High-end retail would return the investment fastest. But the people who lived in that neighborhood for 30 years? He paused and she noticed the pause. Its quality, the fact that he seemed to be working something out rather than reaching for a prepared position. They would be priced out of anything I put there that justified the acquisition cost. So you'd be the gentrifier, she said. Just a well-intentioned one. Or, he said, I could run it at a lower margin and create space for something that serves the community that's still there. It's slower. It's less clean, financially, but it's possible. Aaliyah looked at him for a long time. And well, why does it matter to you, she said. Really? He held her gaze. Because it matters to you. The room did not change. The food kept steaming. The city kept existing outside the windows. But something in the air of the room, the quality of the silence, the particular charge that had been building across all the weeks of managed professionalism and careful distance, shifted by a degree she could feel in her throat. That's not a business reason, she said. No, he said. And it isn't. She picked up her spoon, took a bite, tasted ganjang and star anise, and the very end of her patience with pretending that what this was and what she had decided to call it were the same thing. Small businesses, she said, local, not chains, not franchises. Keep the rents fixed for 5 years minimum, indexed to something reasonable, not market rate. If you can swing a community use clause in at least one unit, a space that can be rented at cost for neighborhood events, pop-ups, in that kind of thing, even better. Junwan listened without writing anything down. That's what I'd want, she said, if you're asking. I am asking. Then that's my answer. He nodded once, picked up his own spoon. They ate. The working lunch lasted 2 hours. They talked about Edgewood and then about the restaurant industry in Atlanta, and then, by the slow and sideways drift of two people who have run out of neutral territory and not yet decided what to do about it. About other things. His first year in Atlanta, sleeping on a colleague's couch in a Sandy Springs apartment while he learned the city's geography and its social architecture simultaneously. Her 2 years at Georgia State before the money ran out, and she made the calculation, clear-eyed and without drama, that a degree in hospitality management was a slower path to the same place she was already standing. His mother, who still called every Sunday from a neighborhood in Mapogu, and who did not know the full shape of what her son had become, only that he sent money home and came back for Chuseok when he could. Her grandmother, who knew everything about what Aaliyah had become and approved of all of it, the waitress job and the compression socks and the one-day plan that kept getting pushed to the following year. What's the one-day plan? Junwan asked. A restaurant, she said. Small. My grandmother's recipes, updated. Not a diner, something a step up, but not so many steps that the people she cooked for couldn't afford to eat there. She paused. Edgewood, maybe, originally. He looked at her. She looked at him. And there it was. The thing she had been filing away without attaching anything to. Sitting in the open air between them, fully visible. I should go, she said. I have a dinner shift. Yes, he said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she stood. Saw her and he stood. and they carried the containers to the kitchen with the easy, unspoken division of labor that develops between people who have spent enough time in the same space. And she put on her coat at the elevator, and he stood in the doorway of the penthouse the way he had stood in the kitchen doorway after the second dinner, watching her the way he watched things, completely without the pretense of not doing it. The elevator came. "June Wan," she said. He looked at her, committed the block on Edgewood. She stepped into the elevator. "Buy it." The doors closed between them. The photograph arrived on a Wednesday, not to her phone, to Savoy's. A physical print slipped under the manager's office door sometime between the lunch and dinner shifts in an envelope addressed in clean block letters to Aaliyah Broussard, floor staff. The manager, a cautious man named Derek who had never once asked her a personal question in 2 years of working together, he left it on the service counter without comment. The photograph was of her, outside the Midtown Tower. Getting out of Kwan's car after the second dinner, caught mid-step, her face in three-quarter profile, sharp and clear in the way of something shot with deliberate equipment and deliberate intention. On the back in the same block letters, "Ask your employer what he does when someone stops being useful." She stood at the service counter with the photograph in her hand and her dinner shift starting in 20 minutes, and the restaurant filling up around her with the ambient roar of a Wednesday evening in Midtown Atlanta. And she breathed through her nose once, and then she did what she had always done with things she needed to think about before reacting to. She put it in her purse, she tied her apron, and she went to work. She called June Wan at 11:15, standing outside in the same spot where she'd stood the night she got into the wrong car, though she went to the front this time, under the streetlight. He answered on the second ring. "Someone put a photograph in my workplace," she said. "Of me. Outside your building." A pause, 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough to tell her this was not information he had. "Are you safe right now?" "I'm on the sidewalk outside Savoy's." "Go inside. I'll call you back in 2 minutes." He called back in 90 seconds. "Kwan is coming. He'll be there in 8 minutes. Don't take another car." "I know how to not take another car," she said. A beat. "Yes, you do." And then, quieter. "I'm sorry, Aaliyah." It was the second time he had said her name, and the first time it had landed like that. Not a marker of progress, not the fractional thaw of a formal distance, but something with weight and grain to it, worried like something he was holding carefully. She went inside and waited. The meeting happened in the penthouse, not the office. She arrived to find June Wan already in the room, with Kwan and a third man she hadn't seen before. Compact, wireframe glasses, a suit that was slightly too big across the shoulders in the way of someone who had recently lost weight or borrowed it. He had a laptop open on the dining table and didn't look up when she came in. June Wan looked up. He crossed the room toward her with a directness that was, for him, almost unusual. His movement generally so composed that this slight acceleration registered as urgency. He stopped 2 feet from her, looked at her face, her posture, her hands. "You're all right," he said. Not a question. An observation he was confirming. "I'm fine," she said. "Tell me what's happening." He did. The man with the glasses was named Ryu, and he handled what June Wan described, with characteristic understatement, as information management. The photograph had been taken 8 days ago. It was one of several. Ryu pulled them up on the laptop without ceremony. A grid of images, all of Aaliyah, all shot from distance with a long lens. Outside Savoy's, on her street in West End, at a grocery store on Lee Street on a Sunday morning in the particular ordinariness of her actual life. Jeans, a canvas tote bag, reading the back of a cereal box in the aisle. She stood at the table and looked at the grid of herself, this record of her unremarkable November, documented by someone she had never seen. And the cold she felt was less like fear and more like violation. The specific cold of finding out that someone has been in a space you assumed was private. "Who?" she said. "A man named Ha Sung-il," June Wan said. "He operates out of Charlotte. We have a disagreement over a distribution corridor in the Carolinas. He's been looking for leverage. And I'm leverage." He didn't answer immediately. The not answering was its own answer. "He sent these to your workplace to tell you that he knows how to find you," June Wan said. And to tell me that he's willing to use that. He paused. He's not going to hurt you. Hurting you makes him an enemy of everyone in this network. It's not in his interest. This is a message, not a threat. It feels like a threat, she said. Yes, he said. Yuri, it does. He said it without trying to revise the feeling or reframe it as something more manageable. And that's my fault. I brought you into this without thinking clearly about what proximity to me costs people. She looked at him. He was watching her with the same quality of attention she had cataloged from the beginning. Total, unguarded, the kind of watching that doesn't perform itself. Except now there was something in it she hadn't seen before. Not guilt exactly. A something older and more settled than guilt. The face of someone who has looked at a consequence directly and is not flinching from it. What are you going to do? She said. About Ha Sung-il, I have options. None of them are your concern. He paused. About you. That depends on what you want. What I want. You could stop, he said. The dinners, the clinic work, all of it. Ryu can make you a considerably smaller presence in any documentation that might be connected to me. It's not a perfect solution, but it's workable. Ha Sung-il loses his leverage. You return to your life. He held her gaze. That's one option. The room was very quiet. Kwan was a statue near the window. Ryu had closed the laptop. What's the other option? She said. Something moved across Junwan's face. Barely. The millimeter shift at the corner of his mouth that she had learned to read not as amusement, but as the place where amusement lived when he wasn't ready to let it show. You let me handle it, he said. And you stay. You stay. Two words that were not about Ha Sung-il at all, and both of them knew it. Aaliyah looked at this man in his gray knit, with his sleeves pushed to his elbows in the penthouse, above the city that had been surveilling her November. And she thought about her grandmother holding on 3 years longer than she should have, because some things are worth staying for even when the cost is visible and the outcome is not guaranteed. She thought about 8 years of carrying plates for people who looked through her like glass, and one man who had watched her work from across the street for 4 hours and decided she was worth coming back for. She thought about a block on Edgewood Avenue and small businesses with fixed rents and a community use clause, and the specific impractical shape of a future she had not let herself want out loud until someone else named it first. Handle it, she said. Yeah, I'll stay. Ha Sung-il was not a problem after December. She didn't ask what that meant, and Junwan didn't explain it. And the line between those two facts, her not asking, him not explaining, was the same line they had been navigating since the beginning, the one that made it possible for both of them to be in the same room without one of them becoming something they weren't. December was quieter. The dinners paused. Junwan had work that took him to Charlotte and then to Chicago, and then for 10 days in the middle of the month to Seoul. For Chuseok delayed by business, she gathered, or something that wore that shape and meant more than it said. He texted from different time zones with the same economy he applied to everything. Brief, factual, occasionally accompanied by a photograph. A restaurant in Mapo-gu, the sign hand-lettered in Korean. No caption. A night market she didn't recognize. The light on the stalls amber and particular. Once a photograph of a street that looked like it might have been Edgewood translated into a different city, a different decade. Old storefronts with hand-painted signs, the kind of street that remembered what it was. My mother's neighborhood, he texted below it. It looks the way yours used to. She stared at that message for a long time before she typed back, tell me about it. He did. And that conversation ran for 3 hours across the distance of 11 time zones, conducted in the early morning of his Seoul and the late night of her Atlanta, lying on her couch in West End with her compression socks finally off and the fan running. And she learned that he had grown up 3 streets from where his mother still lived, in a neighborhood that had survived its own version of the transition she had watched happen to Edgewood. Slower, differently textured, in but the same fundamental arithmetic of who gets to stay and who gets priced into memory. She learned that his father had been a creditor, not an honorable one, and that the shape of what Junwan had become was partly inheritance and partly deliberate revision of that inheritance, the attempt to wield the same instrument differently. She learned that he had a younger sister in Busan who was a landscape architect, and who was the only person in his family who knew, with any precision, what he actually did and who had not spoken to him about it in 7 years. Not from estrangement, but from a kind of agreed-upon silence that functioned as the only love language available in the gap between their lives. She told him things too, in the dark of her West End apartment with the city quiet outside, about Georgia State and the decision to leave, and the specific freedom of a decision made with clear eyes rather than regret. About her father, who had left when she was 9, and who had become, over the years, less a wound and more a fact. The kind of fact that shapes the landscape without defining it. About the restaurant, the real version of it, the one she'd never said out loud in full. The Creole Korean menu she'd been developing privately in her head for 2 years, the way she'd been sourcing recipes from both sides of what she knew, the names she kept changing because every name felt like tempting something. What are the names you've tried? Junwan asked. She listed them. He listened to each one with the seriousness he brought to everything, and then said, none of them. I know. What did your grandmother call her diner? Broussard's. Then call it Broussard's, he said. It already has a history. Give it one more chapter. She didn't respond for a moment. The fan turned. The city breathed. You bought the block, she said. Already 2 weeks ago. You didn't tell me. I was waiting to see if you'd ask. She pulled her knees to her chest, pressed the phone harder against her ear, as if the distance between them was a physical thing that pressure could close. What are the rents? She said. He told her. She could afford it. Not easily. Not without the income from the dinner events and careful attention to every other line in her budget for the first year at least. But she could afford it. Now the number had clearly been selected with that specific affordability in mind, set at a level that was technically market adjacent and practically tailored. Jun Wan, she said. It's a fair rent, he said, before she could say anything else. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm doing the building the favor of having a tenant who knows what she's doing. A pause, and she heard something in it. A shift, the smallest crack in the composed surface of him. I would like it to succeed. For several reasons. Several reasons, she repeated. Yes. The fan turned. The city breathed. Come home, she said. And then, immediately, her chest tightened with the enormity of those 2 words. What they assumed, what they claimed, what they opened up. I mean, when you're done there are things we need to talk about in the same room. A long pause. Long enough that she counted her own heartbeats and got to 7. I'll be back on the 22nd, he said. Okay, she said. Chikalia. Yeah. Jodoyo. Me too. She didn't speak Korean, but she knew what those 2 words meant the way you know some things. Not from study, but from the tone, from the weight, from the fact that they arrived in her chest rather than her ears and stayed there. He came back on the 22nd. She knew he was in the city before he called. Kwan texted her the landing time, error which was either a professional courtesy or something Jun Wan had asked him to do and was too composed to have asked directly. She was at Savoy's for a lunch shift, carrying a plate of shrimp and grits to a 2-top by the window, and her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Landed, 11:40. She finished her shift, went home, changed out of her uniform, and stood in front of her closet for 4 minutes, which was 3 minutes and 50 seconds longer than she normally spent on this decision. Ate before choosing dark jeans and a rust-colored knit her grandmother had given her last Christmas, and her own shoes. Not the service shoes, the real ones, the ones she wore when she was somewhere she had chosen to be. He texted at 7. Are you home? She texted back, yes, come here. She had never given him her address. She knew with the particular certainty of someone who had seen a grid of photographs of herself taken from distance that this was not an obstacle. And she was right. At 7:40 her buzzer sounded, and she pressed the door release, and she stood in the kitchen of her West End apartment waiting for the knock that came 2 minutes later, which was long enough that she wondered if he had stood in the hallway and composed himself first and found, absurdly, that she hoped he had. She opened the door. He was in a dark coat over a dark knit, no suit, no watch. Or rather, the watch was there, but it felt different here, or in the specific context of her actual doorway, than it had in every other context she had seen him in. He was carrying something. A paper bag from a bakery she recognized. Kim's on Ponce de Leon, which was a 30-minute drive from the airport, and which meant he had come here by a deliberate route rather than a direct one. Jisoo told me you had a thing for their sesame bread, he said. Jisoo talks too much, Aaliyah said, and stepped back to let him in. He came into her apartment and looked at it the way he looked at everything, fully without performance. The small living room with the second-hand bookshelf and the good lamp she'd bought on sale 3 years ago, and the kitchen she had made into something beyond its actual square footage through the careful management of storage. The photographs on the refrigerator, her grandmother at the original Broussard's counter, 1970-something, laughing at something off camera, under herself at 16 in a too-big apron, not laughing, concentrating. He stood in front of the refrigerator for a moment and looked at the photograph of the young woman in the too-big apron, concentrating on something out of frame. "What were you doing?" he said. "Plating a po' boy," she said. "My grandmother was very specific about the ratio." He turned to look at her, and there it was, all of it in his face. The whole architecture of the past 2 months compressed into a single look that she had been building toward. In the way you build towards something you can see from a long way off and don't fully believe in until you're standing in front of it. She crossed the kitchen, stopped close enough that she could see the gray threads in his hair that she had first noticed in the back of his car on a rainy October night, and when her worst decision had turned out to be the most interesting one she'd ever made. "You were going to say something," she said. "On the phone, when you said Giodoyo." He reached up and tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, a gesture so deliberate and so careful that she felt it in her sternum. His hand dropped to the side of her jaw and stayed there. "I was saying," he said, "that I also want to come home." He paused. "I haven't had one of those in a long time. It's a strange thing to suddenly have a word for it again." She put her hand over his, pressing it more firmly against her face. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "I'm not going to stop asking questions," she said, "about your work, about the things you do and why and what they cost. I'm not going to stop having opinions about it and telling you when I think something is wrong." She held his gaze. "If that's not, if you need someone who can look away more easily, when then you should know that up front." He looked at her for a long moment. His thumb moved against her cheek. Once, small, the gesture she had seen him use precisely once before, when she was cold from the open car door on a night in October that neither of them had planned. "I came back for you," he said, "specifically because you don't look away." She kissed him first. It felt important that it be her, that the person who had gotten into the wrong car and refused to perform fear and walked empty-handed toward a table that needed the temperature changed, the person who had carried 8 years of her grandmother's work in her compression socks and her pattern recognition, and the name she hadn't named the restaurant yet, that person be the one to move. He kissed her back the way he did everything, fully, without hurry, and with the quality of someone who had already decided and was now simply being in the decision. The sesame bread from Kim's sat on her counter, still warm. Outside, Atlanta continued, November giving way to December at the edges, the nights getting longer and colder. Edgewood Avenue a few miles southwest with its vacant ground floor commercial units waiting for whatever came next. Its history compressed into the bones of the building and its future not yet written, and the space between those two things, the exact shape of something she was going to build. Later, they sat at her small kitchen table, with the bread open between them and coffee going cold in the cups because neither of them had remembered to drink it, deep in a conversation that had started as the restaurant and drifted, by the slow natural gravity of two people with more to say than they'd admitted, into something larger. The menu, the lease terms, whether the community use unit could serve as a pop-up space for local vendors on weekends, whether that would complicate the zoning, whether her grandmother would agree to consult on the Creole side of the menu, or whether she would simply take over, which was the more likely outcome and also the better one. Whether there was a Korean grandmother equivalent in Mapogu who might be persuaded to weigh in on the other half. And Junwan was quiet for a moment at that one. "My mother," he said, "would have opinions, very specific ones." "Does she know about," Aaliyah gestured at the general shape of the situation, "about you?" He picked up his coffee, looked at it, put it down. She knows I have someone. I told her, more than I intended, probably. A pause. She asked if you were good at your job. Aaliyah laughed. A real one, the kind that surprised her. What did you say? I said you were the best I had ever seen at what you do. He looked at her steadily. She said that was all she needed to know. The kitchen held that for a moment, warm and quiet, the fan turning somewhere in the apartment and the city outside going about its business. And the two of them at a small table with cold coffee and an open bag of sesame bread, and the particular peace that settles between people who have stopped navigating around the thing between them and started navigating with it instead. It wasn't simple. It wasn't going to be. The world that Jun Wan moved through did not become less dangerous or less morally complicated because she had kissed him in her kitchen in West End. Ha Seong-il was not a problem anymore. But not a problem anymore in his world had a texture she was still learning to hold. And there would be other names, other tests, other evenings when she would have to decide what she could carry and what she couldn't. But she had been carrying things for a long time. Tables and trays and the particular weight of work that nobody looks at directly. She had compression socks and pattern recognition, and her grandmother's voice in her ear telling her that holding on was its own kind of skill. And that you didn't leave a thing you built because the arithmetic got hard, only because you had calculated clearly and chosen to let go. She had not chosen to let go. And the man across the table from her, the man who had sat in perfect stillness while she fell into his car by accident, who had watched her work for 4 hours and decided she was worth returning for, who had bought a block on Edgewood Avenue and set the rents at a number she could afford and not said so for 2 weeks, was looking at her the way he looked at things he had decided mattered, completely, without the pretense of not doing it. The name, he said. She looked up. For the restaurant. He held her gaze. You said you kept changing it. I did. Is it still changing? She thought about it. About her grandmother at the original counter in 1970-something, laughing at something off camera. About 16-year-old herself in the too big apron, not laughing, concentrating, learning the ratio of something that mattered. No, she said, I think I've got it, she told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, good. One word. The way he said most things, without excess, without ornament, carrying exactly the weight it needed to carry and no more. Outside, the city held itself in the specific hush of a December night in Atlanta. Ice cold coming down from the north in the way it did here. Slow, a little reluctant, as if even the weather understood that some things were worth taking time with. Inside, the coffee was cold, and the bread was warm, and the fan turned and turned, and Aaliyah Broussard sat across from Seo Jun-won at her small kitchen table and thought about a wrong car on a rainy October night, about how the most important doors are the ones you open without looking, and how sometimes what you stumble into in the dark turns out to be exactly where you were supposed to go. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of those silent moments and the beauty of two people finally deciding to stay, then do 3 things. Like this video, subscribe so you always have a seat at our table, and share it with someone who needs to believe that the right door is out there, waiting to be opened. May you find a safe place of your own, where you are truly seen and never have to look away. Drop a comment telling me which part of their story hit you the hardest. You're not just watching, you're family now, and family always shows up for each other. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow with another story that makes you feel everything. Welcome home.